you're talking about that 6-page ethics complaint that was filed yesterday. Now, it was signed by 3 House Republicans, and they wrote that Stahl Hamilton's attempt to conceal the Bible showed that she disrespected the beliefs of her fellow lawmakers. They also wrote that there were some, quote, serious legal and factual questions that need to be looked into, which begs the question, what are the legal issues? Was a crime actually even committed? Now, after moving the Bibles, these pictures show that Stahl Hamilton placed them in couch cushions and even stowed one of them in a refrigerator. The Bibles, they were never taken out of the State House, and they were not damaged at any point. Now, for this reason, an attorney I spoke with today said Republicans are overreaching with this ethics complaint and on something that Stephanie Stahl Hamilton called a stunt, something that she also called a playful take on the separation of church and state.
It isn't a theft for the reason that there's no evidence of intent to deprive. It didn't leave the possession of the owner. The owner is not these 3 guys who signed it. The owner is House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives still have it. And they never lost control of it. I mean, it's there.
And Tom Ryan is a Democratic-leaning attorney, and he told me that Stahl Hamilton should have picked a very different way to make her point. He actually called it a pretty stupid stunt on its own. Now, I asked to interview the lawmakers who signed this complaint, and I was told that they were all unavailable. Stahl Hamilton now has until the end of the week to respond to this complaint.
Well, Dennis, what are the possible ramifications of this? Would she face any kind of punishment?
It's likely it could end up in some sort of punishment. I mean, the ethics complaint is going to move forward, is in all likelihood, is what I understand. But I think what it'll end up being is something like an official rebuke or some sort of censure on the floor. I don't think it goes beyond that. I don't think we see someone get kicked out of the House like we saw a few weeks ago with former Representative Liz Harris, who is now trying to get reappointed back to the seat that she was recently kicked out of.
All right, we'll see what comes of it. Dennis Welch in our newsroom tonight. Dennis, thanks.